Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply, and this video is to bring you a closer look at the Bommer number LB4390C-454-630 single-acting spring hinge, full mortise, contract grade, lube bearing, stainless steel base finish in a satin color. And I just happen to have one here. Everything I just said, this is that hinge. Okay, so let's dissect the part number and let's learn what this hinge is all about. So the Bommer, the part number is LB4390C-454-630. We will literally be able to dissect that part number and know exactly what we're getting here. So LB in the part number stands for lube bearing. It's a concealed style of bearing construction specific to Bommer, rated significantly heavier for duty cycle than a traditional ball bearing hinge. Being a spring hinge, it has to be a lube bearing, by the way. Just so happens to be superior to a traditional ball bearing. The 4390C. The 4390, all of that conspires to mean a number of things. It's obviously a full mortise style hinge that when the leaves are brought parallel, they're meant to be flush to the door and frame. It means that it is a square corner hinge with the hole locations in this specific pattern, this specific template pattern is how this is. There is a link below this video to a document called Template where you will be able to review the location of those screw holes so that you can accurately determine if this will match what you're replacing before you even purchase it. If you're doing a replacement. Speaking of those holes, screws are included, okay, in a matching finish and base material. Now, the important thing is the C at the end of the part number. That means that this is a contract or commercial grade hinge, meaning the leaf thickness is 0.134. You can do a thinner gauge residential caliber hinge like this, but when they add C to the end, it tells us that it's a thicker, the commercial standard thickness. And depending on the size of the hinge, it'll be, if it's 4.5 tall, it will certainly be a 134 thousandths of an inch thickness. And that's also important to know so that you are purchasing a hinge that is of the proper leaf thickness, because your door and frame might be prepped more shallow or it might be prepped too deep or whatever the case is. Important to eliminate that as a possibility of mistake. If you were to change the 4390C into a variety of other hinge possibilities, you're going to alter the thickness, the overall layout, footprint, the location of the holes, the treatment of the corners. All that will be modified greatly. So 4390C, if you need a contract grade, thick commercial grade spring hinge, you're on the right path with this hinge in particular. Now, the 454, that's a special thing, and really important to know that that's the size. This is a 4.5 by 4 inch hinge. You might be able to tell that this hinge does not seem to be square. It does look more rectangular, and indeed it is. It's 4.5 tall by 4 wide. It's really important to understand that the height is the first dimension. Really important. If you're dealing with a square hinge, I suppose you can get away without knowing that, because you can. But if you're dealing with a 4.5 by 4, a 4 by 3.5, a 4.5 by 6, a 5 by 4.5, common sizes of hinge, and you're going to supply doors and frames, take it from me, you need to know the hinge is the first dimension. It's very common that you will have a 4.5 by 4 on aluminum storefront. It's very common you'll have 5 by 4.5 on hollow metal doors and frames where the width is greater than 3.0. Really important. Height's the first dimension. The opposite of how a door is. A door is going to be width and then height. Hinges, for some reason, and I don't know the history of it, but hinges are the opposite orientation of what that is. Now, 630 in the part number, that means a couple of things. First of all, it means it's made of stainless steel. Okay, the spring inside of here is coated with a corrosion-resistant coating to give it incredibly high performance stainless-like properties when it comes to corrosion resistance. And it means that it's a brushed finish. Being all stainless steel, you can order this in either a brushed finish or a polished finish, which would be a mirror-like finish, and that part number would be 629, in fact, is what a polished finish would be. Okay, so 629 would be polished. Hold up the stamping that's on there. You might see this on your hinge, and if you do, you're certainly in the right range for the right type of hinge, but these part numbers that you're looking at here are not the part number of the hinge. They're just the UL and ULC classification of the hinge. It's like if you looked at the backside of your toaster, it would have some numbers on it. It just means that it's UL listed. Doesn't tell you anything about the toaster, so to speak. Bad analogy, but nonetheless. A toaster is something we're all familiar with. Now, this is a spring hinge. What that means is the hinge is self-closing. The LB4390 is a single-acting hinge, meaning the door will open to a certain degree and then will close. It doesn't come back the other way, which would be a double-acting style hinge. There are details down below this video in regards to setting or treating this as the spring hinge that it is. Now, this has the summary. This is a non-handed hinge. It can be installed on either left-hand or right-hand doors. It doesn't matter. This is self-lubricating bearings. It's a maintenance-free construction bearing from a Bommer, the LB. Easily adjustable spring tension. I'll demonstrate that shortly. Pivot point aligns with commercial butt hinges, meaning you can mix and match this with a commercial hinge that will be 134 thousandths, provided that it's 4.5 inch wide as well. And a thicker leaf, thinner leaf, it's not going to work right. If it's not 4 inch wide, it's not going to work right. The point of the matter is you generally can get away with 2 spring hinges on a door and 1 regular ball bearing hinge, and when it's the right size and thickness, it'll be fully compatible. Made of stainless, 134 thousandths, square corners. A total of 8 holes are on this hinge. Screws are included. Maximum recommended size for a labeled door is 3 foot by 7 foot at a maximum weight of 85 pounds when it comes to using spring hinges. And when you get past that up to 110 pounds, you're going to use 3 spring hinges. Now, there are 2 links below here, certifications and hinge selection guide and installation instructions. The certifications page, basically what's important to know there is how many hinges you're going to use based on the size and weight of the door. Assuming you're doing a commercial door, probably 2. Wouldn't hurt to have 3. If you're not sure, opt to 3, and I'll explain why later. For fire-rated openings, the maximum width is 3 foot. You cannot use these spring hinges on a door greater than 3 foot, so be mindful of that. Up to A label, 3-hour rating. There's a table down below that allows you to determine how many spring hinges you're going to use on a given door size. And it does state that this is a grade 1 hinge, meaning that it's been tested to meet or exceed 1 million cycles. So that's lots of door cycles that you're going to deal with. Okay, now let's take a look at the installation instructions are up next. So, first of all, and this will make sense after we get into it. You know what, let's skip that. I don't want to... The very top thing says caution. We'll get into that when we're done talking about how to set the hinge. This hinge has a feature here, has a different sort of feature here. Inside of here is the tension collar. Down here doesn't have one. When you're installing the hinge with the tension collar pointed towards the top of the door, go ahead and do that now. Get the door hung. There's nothing wrong. This is just going to act as a normal hinge. Get the door hung. When the tension collar is pointed towards the top of the door, and you can install it upside down if you want to, just reverse this. Install the tension rod. For every order of hinges, you'll get at least 1 tension rod. For every hinge, you're going to get 1 tension pin. This client ordered 2 hinges, so there's 1 tension rod and 2 pins. into the tension collar, insert the tension rod into one of the holes, and rotate it clockwise. As you do so, you reveal a new hole. Into one of those new holes, insert the tension pin. It's that simple. Back to the caution at the top. If your door is going to 180 degrees, do not exceed 3 holes of tension. If you're going to 90 degrees, you can go up to 4 holes of tension. If you hear a severe cranking of the spring as you open the door in a new installation, stop. That spring is contorting. You're cranking it too much. Back that off. Add an additional spring hinge if you need to. You're going to want to put the spring hinges in the middle of the door first, then at the bottom, and as a last resort, up at the top. It's that simple. You can read the installation instructions there. Nothing gets into beyond that. People make their own tension pins time to time because they need to. There are links below this video to the tension rod and pin. I would urge you to not manufacture your own pins, only because people have actually been harmed by making unintentional contact with a 4-penny nail that someone's cut and stuck in there. And then an actual story is a child leaned up against the changing room door and then started to slide down the door just because the child was going to sit on the floor waiting for the parent in the fitting room, and gouged their back severely because of those sharp corners. Now, the tension pins from Bomber, I mean, you would not want to stick that in your hand and start gouging it, but it's not a sharp end per se, and I would be challenged to learn that someone actually broke skin by just making unintentional contact or very gentle contact with the pin. So be mindful of making your own. It does expose a certain amount of risk to the installer at that point. We've got a link below this video to the proper pins and tension rods for this hinge. Now, I said earlier, why go with more hinges rather than less if you're unsure? Well, because you will certainly get a more predictable, reliable behavior out of the opening, meaning I liken spring hinges to a tugboat. They don't go very fast, but they can pull a lot of weight. And if you have a scenario where you're trying to close the door and you need to increase the spring tension so high to get the door to just move quickly through the opening so that it can kind of get all the way closed, overcome all of the force or pressure of all of the air that it's literally hitting and having to move out of the way, the resistance of the latch bolts making contact with the strike lip, and then getting the door to the closed position. If you don't have a lot of residual stored tension at the last 15 degree or so of close, you're really not going to reliably close that door. And in that case, adding a spring hinge will allow you to share that load more evenly across all of the spring hinges, but more importantly, having a greater amount of stored energy at the very critical closing section or cycle of the door. That is where you would opt towards another spring hinge. Where you will be well served by having an additional spring hinge will be in an environment where it could be the exterior of a 3-flat building. You've got an intercom, an electric strike, a storeroom lock, and you've got spring hinges. The behavior of that door, self-closing, is going to change winter to summer, to spring, to summer, to winter. You'll have windows open. You can back those hinge pins, the tension pins off. You don't need so much force. Well, you'll probably need more force in the summer versus in the winter where there's no windows open, so there's no air racing through the building back to front. A downside of this hinge in particular is it's costly. It's stainless steel. It's a commercial grade hinge, so you're not going to just add one on the opening, but you will if it's necessary. And be mindful. If you're doing this if you're installing these on a fire-rated door, you have 2 requirements. Your door must be self-closing and self-latching, and the stored energy in the springs need to be adequate to give you that self-latching requirement so that the door predictably and reliably closes and latches every single time. I'm not a fan of spring hinges. I don't think they're a proper way to close the door. However, they are at times the only way to close a door, and in those requirements might be the least might be permissible. An application I'm talking about would be an attached garage, suburban Chicago. The requirements of the opening on this garage door are that it's fire rated, 20-minute. That means it's got to be self-latching, self-closing. Spring hinges there is where you would probably put that, because you're not going to encounter agreement that you should install a hydraulic closer onto the door, which will give you control over the door, rather than wind the spring up and let it go. Wind the spring up and let it go. So spring hinges certainly have their place, and there are who knows how many hundreds of millions of them that likely exist in the world, doing their job every single day. But be mindful to tilt the scales in your benefit when employing them, because they are not necessarily a perfect solution. Not that a hydraulic closer would be. Finally, there's a link below this video to the manufacturer's page, where you can pull up not only all of the Bommer products that we sell, but a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to the full product catalog. The last thing I'd like to point out to you is the Bommer logo. Get the camera to focus on that. Right above the Bommer logo, it says Made in USA, a fact that Bommer is quite proud of, as am I to represent them. If you have any questions on the LB4390C-454-630, single-acting spring hinge in stainless steel, or any other Bommer product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you